Well, welcome to Change Your World. We're glad you're tuning in today. My name is Tom Hurd, and today I'm joined by two of my sons, Kyle and Casey. And we're going to do something a little bit different today. We're not going to jump right into politics, but we're going to talk about history a little bit. We're going to talk about some things that happened back in World War II. And then once we get done with that, we'll probably turn the conversation towards some parallels that are maybe happening today. So Kyle has done a lot of research on this topic, and he's going to kind of lay out the historical basis for what we're going to talk about today. Kyle, you ready?
Yeah, I guess. I'd like to preface this firstly and say that this is going to be a super pulled back overview. This is not getting in depth. There is so much to World War II that it would probably take years to do an entire podcast on it. And a lot of the information that I'm getting from this actually comes from a podcast called the History of World War II podcast. And it was started in 2010 or 2011, and it's still going on now. So just for some proof of
World War II started in 2010.
No, this podcast. He's been
It's a
doing it
podcast.
for 9 years,
Okay.
8 or 9 years.
Okay.
So this is a very detailed subject, and we're not going to get super deep into it, is what I'm saying.
Right. So the podcast has taken longer than the actual war took to fight,
Yes,
is what?
much longer.
Okay.
But if you do, are interested in it, it's called the History of World War II podcast by Ray Harris Jr. It's a very good resource. Also, I mean, there's plenty of books and videos and stuff out there. It's a very interesting, for me anyway. I'm kind of a history buff, so I like learning this kind of thing. So, but I guess let's get started. So, most people know the buildup of World War II. It kind of started at the end of World War I with the Treaty of Versailles. Germany and the Central Powers kind of got slammed pretty hard, which, I mean, they, did start a war and countless people died. So Germany was turned into the emperor abdicated, and it was turned into the Weimar Republic. And they had a government, kind of like a parliament kind of system. It was more like the British system than the American system, and they weren't allowed to have, it was 100,000 troops or whatever was the most they were allowed to have. They weren't allowed to make planes and tanks and that kind of stuff. And they had all of these war reparations that they had to pay back. So they were getting slammed as far as money went. They were bleeding money, hemorrhaging money. And that kind of atmosphere allowed the National Socialist Germans Worker Party to kind of come to the fore, led by Adolf Hitler. And he came to the fore, with the idea of we need to change things. Germany has been getting crapped on for years. We need to, we didn't lose the war. We were stabbed in the back, blah, blah, blah. And they began kind of building up their force. And there was a border in between France and Germany that had been kept demilitarized, called the Rhineland. Germany was not allowed to have troops in there. And so they just decided, we're going to put some troops in there and see what happens. And Hitler was like super worried about this. He was like, if France starts coming across and, declares war, you get out of there as soon as you can. Like, he was super nervous. So they went in and, France complained, Britain complained. They had a little bit of a sit down, but it was decided that it was nothing more than Germans walking around their back garden, I think is what the British guy said. And so nothing was officially done. There was a complaint filed, but that's it. So this kind of inspired Hitler and the Nazi Party to keep on doing what they were doing. And there was an area in Austria that had once been a part of Germany, and they decided that they needed to annex it, and they Nazis were kind of in charge in Austria, so they just kind of went in and made all these like reasons for war, but there was never a war because they just went in and Austria just kind of gave it up, and so they annexed Austria without a shot being fired. Um, then that worked so well that they decided to do the same thing in Czechoslovakia. There was an area called the Sudetenland that had once been a part of Germany, and there was a bunch of German people there, and Hitler said that we needed that. We need to protect the Germans. That's our mission as the Nazi Party, and there was some build up. Again, they made some justifications for war. They were ready to go to war. But Britain and France kind of, got everybody together, and they hammered out the Treaty of Prague, and Germany was given the Sudetenland. Poland took a part of Czechoslovakia. Romania took a part of Czechoslovakia, and I think the Soviet Union, but I'm not 100% sure. So they just kind of parceled out Czechoslovakia without any, Britain and France went in there and did it, but Czechoslovakia didn't really have much of a say in it. They were like, but they didn't have the army to stop the Nazis. And actually, a lot of the tanks and equipment that the Nazis wound up getting for the war effort was that they got it by annexing Austria and that part of Czechoslovakia, because they had plenty of equipment, but it was just given to the Germans when they took it over. So Britain and France, orchestrated this deal. There's going to be peace in our time was the tagline after it. Because Hitler said, that after this, I'm done. I'm not going to take any more land. I just need this part. So they gave it to him. And 6 months later, there was back in World War One, there wasn't a Poland. Germany is kind of near its borders now, but that was kind of like a lowercase r. Like you had the main body of it, and then it extended over to where the Baltic countries are now. Lithuania and Estonia and all that, and they had the seaboard there, and then Russia was underneath them. When Russia, they had their civil war, so they dropped out of the World War One, and then obviously Germany and the Central Powers lost, so the Allies put Poland there. There was a lot of Polish people, that's what they called themselves. So, all right, this is Poland, and they got up to the North Sea in Poland, but there was a city called Danzig that was a free city. It wasn't part of Germany or part of Poland. It was just basically a city-state all its own. And so after having the success with Austria and Czechoslovakia, Hitler said, well, I mean, Danzig has a lot of German people in it, and the Poles could tell us that we're not allowed to go there, so we need to secure a channel from Germany to Danzig. And obviously the Poles protested. And there was another conference, and they were going back and forth. Hitler was like, I want to make sure that we have this route to Danzig because it was a good port. And so just this back and forth. And then finally the allies of Britain and France, I guess, got tired finally of appeasing Hitler. So they said, they're going to stand by the Polish, and if Germany decides to attack, then they will enter the war on the side of Poland. So let's see, Hitler and Stalin, well, not Hitler and Stalin, but Germany and the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact. It's called the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, I think is what the name of it was. As I said, they weren't going to go to war with each other. For a long time, the Soviet Union had kind of been pushing the Allies to stop appeasing Hitler. Stop. They were ready to go to war when he was talking about with Czechoslovakia. They wanted to move a bunch of their troops up. Obviously, I'm sure they had some ulterior motives, but they wanted to move a bunch of their troops into Poland to then attack Germany, and obviously Poland was not too fond of that idea, so they shot it down. And then there was no war anyway, so they didn't worry about it. But eventually they decided they were going to sign this non-aggression pact. Stalin wanted to go after, he obviously wanted part of Poland. Poland and the newly formed Soviet Union in the 20s had had a war, and Poland was able to get some territory off of them. And they Soviet Union wanted that back, and they also wanted to take back Finland, who had once been a part of Russia in World War One. So they had their own ideas. It'd be better if they didn't have to fight Germany, so they signed this pact. And then Hitler said it was Danziger War, and Poland said no, so they went to war. They attacked September 1st, 1939, and they tried out their new blitzkrieg tactics. They had the tanks, and the Polish land was pretty much perfect for the blitzkrieg strategy. It was all a bunch of plains, and that's why the Mongols had done so good coming up through there, because they were essentially using a blitzkrieg tactic, mobile warfare kind of thing. Then the Soviet Union came into Poland, and there wasn't too much fighting on that side. There was a little bit, but they said they were, just securing Poland from chaos. So they took back the land that they wanted. And that whole war, it wasn't really a war, but the Polish invasion took 36 days, September 1st, 1939 to October 1939. And obviously, once Germany started invading Poland, the United Kingdom and France both declared war on Germany. And actually, Germany had most of their troops in the east to take over Poland. They had left a kind of a garrison force on the west there. And as soon as they declared war, France actually invaded right there where the Maginot Line is, right where Germany and France touch, right above Switzerland. And I think they made it in like 150 kilometers, I think. And the Germans just kind of fell back, and then their general over the entire army said, no, we need to, you need to pull back to the Maginot Line because we need to defend. So they actually invaded and took a bunch of territory, and then they just ceded it right back and went back to the Maginot Line. So Germany and the Soviet Union kind of crushed Poland. Like I said, it was only 36 days long. And then there was this, they called it the phony war, because all the countries were at war, but there was no real battles or anything. And then Soviet Union invaded Finland, and they called the Allies, France and Britain, to to send aid. And there was talk about that. So then the Nazis decided that they needed to secure Norway, because they had a lot of iron ore and that kind of stuff up there. So they invaded Denmark and Norway and wound up taking them over. So then we just kind of have this stalemate for a few months as everybody's waiting to see what happens. France called up all of its troops and was ready to go, but then there was all this waiting, so there was a bunch of soldiers, when they don't have anything to do, tend to seek sources of amusement for themselves, and they began drinking, and um, there was a lot of drunkenness with the soldiers. They actually set up like drunk tanks for the soldiers, so when they would come back from being on leave and they would be hungover, they could stay in these little places, and then um, when they finally sobered up, they would go back to their posts. So the invasion of France in the Low Countries was called Fall Geld, which is Plan Yellow is what it translates as, Code Yellow. Finally took place on May 10th, 1940, and France's idea was that it was going to happen a lot like it did in World War One, where Germany invades Belgium and Denmark, or not Denmark, excuse me, the Netherlands, and Belgium and the Netherlands, and then moves into France that way. So the Nazis used that as kind of their feint. They pushed hard into Belgium and the Netherlands, and that drew most of the forces of the Allies up there, and then they were able to come through Luxembourg and the Ardennes forest and do a lot of damage. But France had this idea that war was going to be, even though they had kind of seen what happened in Poland. Poland was not too happy with them because they didn't ever come to help them. I mean, they didn't have a lot of time. They figured the Poles could hold off until they could mount an offense, but like I said, it only lasted 36 days. But they had seen kind of the German tactics, but they still thought it was going to be, for whatever reason, they still thought it was going to be like World War One, where you're going to dig these trenches and you're going to just, it's not going to move much, beyond a few hundred meters or whatever. And so the idea was to just sit there and hold them until they figured 1941 would be when they would be able to push in, because their economic and industrial power would kind of overtake the Germans by that point, and they wouldn't be able to hold on, and it would just kind of end like World War One. So, that there's this idea that the Germans had, their Panzer tanks and their Stuka bombers and all their amazing equipment that they had, and it was way better than everybody else's. But from what I've read, that's not really true. France actually had a better heavy tank than Germany, and they had more tanks than Germany. And actually, the Panzers that the Germans had, they were supposed to be able to take out tanks, but the British Matilda tank was pretty much bulletproof compared to what the Panzer tanks could throw at. They couldn't get through the front armor of the Matilda tanks. And the Matilda tanks weren't built to take on tanks either. They just had machine guns and stuff. And there's actually one report of during the battles, these Matilda tanks just basically ran over the Panzer anti-tank tanks. They would shoot at them and they wouldn't do anything, but they would just run over, like literally take their tank and run over other tanks with them.
Wow.
Yeah. But so there's France and England, the Allies combined, they combined for about the same number of troops. France had more tanks than Germany, and like I said, the heavy tanks were better than German tanks, and they had more, or I think they had about the same amount of aircraft. The Germans had more bombers and the French had more fighters. But the French hierarchy was of this opinion that the tanks and the planes were going to kind of be secondary and tertiary to the infantry, the great infantry. I mean, they have this history with Napoleon and all that. The infantry was the thing that did it, and the Germans come through with their tanks and everything, and France has a bunch of their troops are kind of spread out. They put a bunch up to the north to defend against Belgium because they figured that's where it was going to go. But they also have some obviously at the Maginot Line, and they have some guarding the border of Switzerland, which I guess Germany could have tried to go through Switzerland to get there, but that would have been a tough proposition since the Swiss have all of them have guns, and they're pretty much like the America of Europe when it comes to gun, population wise.
Right.
But go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and it certainly wouldn't have happened fast. And had they gone that way, they would have encountered resistance, and everybody would have known that's where they were going.
And it's also the Alps.
Yeah.
So it's not easy.
Napoleon
like
knows how rough that
lowlands.
is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, if you guys want to ask any questions or make comments, just jump in there. I'm just rambling on here.
Well, so I know that you mentioned to me there was some French military leaders who were looking at this, and they basically discounted an attack through the Ardennes.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah. So their thought was that the Ardennes, it was a heavily wooded area, and it did have a road going through it from Luxembourg and kind of connected Luxembourg, Germany, Belgium, and France. But they assumed that the road was it was just a dirt road, like a horse path or whatever. They assumed that the tanks would not be able to make it through there. So actually, I do have a quote here. Let's see. In March 1940, less than 2 months before the German surprise invasion, Parliamentary Army Committee member Pierre Charles Taittinger led a paramilitary delegation to inspect the defenses in Sedan, and Sedan is right there near the Ardennes, a city for whose defense General Hunsinger was responsible. Taittinger prophetically reported, "In this region, we are entirely too much taken with the idea that the Ardennes would and the Meuse, I don't know the French pronunciation. In English, I would say Meuse River, will shield Sedan, and we will assign entirely too much significance to these natural obstacles. The defenses in this sector are rudimentary." He wrote that he trembled at the thought that the Germans might attack there. General Hunsinger dismissed Taittinger's warning entirely. The chief controller of the army asked General Hunsinger if he put any stock into Taittinger's report, and the general replied, "Certainly not. Germans are dead afraid of attacking." On May 9th, less than 24 hours before the invasion, Hunsinger told his troops that the German preparations which you have observed are only an exercise. The Germans are not crazy enough to take the additional risk of facing 27 Belgian divisions. So they were not worried at all that they were going to come through there.
Right.
And obviously the Germans were able to make it through there. They kind of did their feint up in, it wasn't a feint. They did invade the Netherlands and Belgium, but not with their entire force like the Allies thought. And then they brought a bunch through the Ardennes and through Luxembourg. And I read that it wasn't a wide road, so obviously these tanks just have to go one right after the other, the tanks and the trucks and the troops and everything.
Right.
So they're on this long line spread out through this trail, and one of the French generals or strategic officers or whatever said that they needed to send some bombers and just bomb these. I mean, you could take out a bunch of them because they're all on this line. Plus, if you're able to take out a couple at the beginning and mess up some of the road, then they're stuck. They have to move this tank out of the way. But they said no. We needed to hang on to the planes. We need to hold them back in reserve. So they didn't want to do that. Then the Germans make it through, and they take Sedan pretty quick. And they're like, well, they're going to be stuck on the other side of the river. They won't be able to get across. They had these pontoon things that they had to build to get the tanks across, and then they had little rubber boats that the infantry would come across in.
Mm-hmm.
And the French had like pillboxes and machine gun nests set up, and they weren't really worried about them coming across because they said the only way for them to be able to ford the river with these defenses we have set up is if they shell us with artillery like they did in World War One, and we'll know because it'll take them forever to get up here. But the Germans kind of used their Stuka bombers as airborne artillery.
Right.
So they just flew right over there and shelled them and bombed them, and they were kind of down in their holes, and Germans went right across the river and took the defenses pretty easily. Let's see, what else did I want to cover? I don't want to get too far into it.
Well, okay. So let's talk about what you've already talked about. So France, how would you characterize the mistakes that France made?
Well, there was a bevy of them, I'll say, and not just the French. The British made mistakes as well.
Sure.
Belgians and the Netherlands, but they had these old commanders. From
Saying
World
old
War
people
I.
are bad.
Yeah.
Nice.
Not bad, just stupid. Well, they had all these World War I commanders, that were well respected by the military and the population, but they, were of the old guard.
Right.
The reason why World War I wound up being so deadly is because they were fighting it like it was, 1819, but it was, in the 19 teens, and weapons and that kind of stuff had advanced far beyond the tactics.
Right.
Obviously by the end they had the first flight was Kitty Hawk, right? 1903, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So obviously they had planes.
In World War One, you're talking
in World
about.
War One, yeah. And they kind of used them as scouting, and there was some aerial dogfights. That's where the legend of the Red Baron comes from. And they would also occasionally drop basically grenades from the airplanes. Funny story I was reading about World War One and planes and stuff. Obviously it was a very dangerous job.
Sure.
They had just kind of come up with the idea of parachutes, but they were pretty heavy, and the British were discussing whether or not to give pilots parachutes, and this is like the most British thing ever. They said they chose not to give them parachutes because it might inspire cowardice in the men.
Oh boy.
They're going to jump out of their plane. If they don't have a parachute, they can't do that, so they have to stay in there.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, it's interesting with when you talk about planes in World War One. It's really interesting about the development of the technology and how I know this is kind of off topic for what you were discussing, but it's interesting how the Wright brothers, they had a monopoly on airplanes pretty much in America, and they had like stifled technological development of airplanes leading up to World War One. Because when America got involved in World War One and they had the Wright brothers planes, like they were horrible compared to what the Europeans had, because they weren't basically, the Wright brothers were suing everybody in America for trying to develop airplanes, and Europe didn't have to worry about that. So like their airplanes are actually better than our airplanes during the start of World War One.
Yeah. Well, also, if with America not being at war, invention or what is it? Necessity is the mother of all invention. So when you need weapons of war, you tend to produce them faster than if you don't really need them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so what you were saying too is, okay, so the military leaders in France were looking at things through the eyes of someone who fought in World War One.
Mm-hmm.
You saw the same thing in the Revolutionary War. Britain came over here expecting to fight the type of war where you line up across one another and just shoot at one another. We couldn't compete with them then on that basis, so we turned to guerrilla warfare, and that's how we won the war. So war is constantly changing, tactics of war and techniques and so on and so forth. So France was stuck looking at their defenses and all their options more in light of the past than what was currently methods of war. So that was one issue they had. What other problems did they have?
Well, there was, obviously the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany had signed a non-aggression pact, and Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, was kind of like the head communist, like in the whole world. Like everybody kind of, he was trying to implement communism everywhere, but everybody kind of answered him or his lieutenants and that kind of stuff. And there was a lot of communists in France, and he had let it slip through, his underlings that they needed to kind of get France out of the war. So there was a lot of sabotage going on by these communists, or I guess you could call them anti-fascists. They did a lot of sabotage to the French military. I watched a video. I can't remember what video it was, so take this with a grain of salt. But he had said somewhere between 15 and 25% of French artillery had been sabotaged by these saboteurs, and they did a bunch of other damage, and they kind of sapped the morale out of the general populace, and that was another, I guess, problem with France. Their heart wasn't really in it,
Okay.
World War One had been such a slog, and the majority of the fighting had taken place in France because the Germans had pushed in. They got a few hundred kilometers into France before the lines kind of solidified. And there was actually a lot of French that were deserting in World War One, or we're talking about, they had French troops got shot and stuff for deserting in World War One.
Right.
So already they're, and I guess you can't really blame people. I mean, war is hell, like the old saying. I mean, it's a terrible, terrible experience, and especially World War One, where you're just in these trenches and you're getting shelled day after day after day after night after night after night. They're shooting mustard gas at you.
Yeah.
It was just a terrible, terrible war. I mean, not that any other war is great, but so it was this kind of psychological scarring on the French citizenry and military, and that's why they, right when they pushed into Germany right away, they were like, "We're not ready for an offensive war. We need to pull back. We're just going to defend." And
Well, and that went back to the fact that, and not only France, like you say, but Britain as well, Belgium. Um, there was kind of an air of appeasement because they
yeah,
didn't want to.
yeah,
We don't want to get into this,
mm,
and Hitler kept, he's like a 5-year old. He's going to keep pushing the envelope
mm,
until somebody says no.
yeah,
And they weren't saying no very often.
yeah.
So
Well, like I said, like when they remilitarized the Rhineland, like, he was super nervous. Hitler was,
mhm,
like, as soon if they start coming, you pull out as soon, it'll be an accident. That's what we'll say.
yeah,
Um, but by the end, I mean, he had just been, like you
oh, he
said, they
was
had appeased him
emboldened.
so much
Yeah,
that he was super emboldened.
right.
Um,
Okay. So so not only did they suffer from looking at things in kind of an archaic um, way in terms of war strategy, but they were just downright wrong also about, they had people warning them about where the attack would probably come from, and they ignored that. And then even when they knew that it was coming that way, rather than use the technology that they had with the planes to totally disrupt that,
mhm,
they chose not to do that.
yeah.
So we've got
Yeah,
just a whole
they kept
comedy of
holding all
errors.
these things in reserve, thinking that
Right,
it was going to be this long. Like, if
right,
we send our planes and then they shoot half of them down, then we're
right,
going to have a 10-year war here. We need these planes, and so they kept
right. But
holding everything in reserve.
they
And there was
might have
actually,
stopped the war right then and there.
yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
there was actually, the Germans pushed in even faster than the Germans thought they were going to push in. Um,
Well, when you have no opposition, that's pretty easy to do.
um, and their supply lines were super super stretched. I mean, if you have all these tanks,
Sure.
even now, you have to take care and maintain your car,
Yeah.
um, and
Well,
your
you got
equipment. If you have a
fuel,
bulldozer or whatever.
food.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean everything.
Back then, this is kind of new technology, so the
Right.
tanks and stuff broke down all the time,
Yeah.
ran out of fuel, so their supply lines are super stretched. It was like 200 kilometers, I think, that they
Wow.
had this supply line, and it was only about 45 kilometers wide.
Mm.
So they said, okay, we can just basically hit the supply line in the side, shoot right through, and surround the Germans that had pushed ahead. And
Yep.
actually, the two German generals, it was Rommel and I can't remember the other one's name. Um, but they almost got fired because they basically disobeyed orders. They told them to stop. The German high command told them to stop because they were getting too far out ahead,
Right.
and they just kept going.
Mm.
And so somebody came in. I can't remember exactly who. Somebody came in and told them that they were being relieved of duty,
Mm.
and the German high command of the army said no. These guys are going to be our generals.
Mm.
Um, but so they had this idea they're gonna split the supply lines and surround Rommel and I can't remember his name now.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Well,
so
obviously
they
that didn't
pulled
happen.
these tanks up from the south, right? Um, and they have this long 4-day forced march or whatever that they have to tank or they have to take. So once they finally get there, you're in France, so you have your own supply lines, you would think, but they
Mm-hmm.
got there and all of the tanks were out of gas.
Oh,
And obviously, the people were out of
out of food.
well, they weren't out of food, but they were what's the word I'm looking for? Metaphorically out of gas. They had just did a
Okay.
4-day forced march,
Right.
so they couldn't attack. So they
Mm.
waited, and I mean, it's just this crazy, like there's all these crazy stories in war where things can just turn.
Yeah.
Um,
One little
yes, they made it all the way
circumstance.
up there and they're ready to attack. It's like, all right, we're going to do it the next day. We're going to fill up, refuel the tanks, and get the men rested. Blah blah blah. And if they had gone that night, I mean, obviously they were not in good shape, but if they had gone that night, they probably could have succeeded, but the Germans finally got the pontoons across at like 5 o'clock the next morning, and they got the supply lines in, and their attack was supposed to be at like 7 or whatever, and the Germans were refreshed, and they had their supply lines secured, so they were able to beat back the French attack.
Mm.
So so they had all these ideas, this is what's going to happen, and there was just a lot of things that went wrong that hurt the French chances.
Sure. Okay, so we've touched on several of the things that from hindsight, it's much easier to pick apart somebody's mistakes.
Oh yeah, that's definitely true.
Mistakes were plentiful,
Yeah.
and we see how history changing they were. So.
But there was one quote I want to give real quick,
Sure.
kind of to finish everything off.
Okay.
This is from Daniel L. Davis, who was a retired U.S. Army colonel, and it was written, in the present about the past.
Okay.
But he says, though Germany eventually lost World War II and France again ended up on the victorious side, the leadership traits demonstrated before and during the battle in 1940 are textbook examples of what makes for great leadership and what kind of leadership leads to defeat.
Yeah, very good. Very good. And some of those things were lack of decisiveness.
Yes.
Right. Some of those things were lack of proper planning. Some of those things were, frankly, fear.
Yeah, a lot of it was fear.
Right.
Yeah.
So the old quote: if you don't understand history or hear history, or you're not taught history, you're doomed to repeat history. Right.
Yep.
So here we are in 2019. We're not at war per se, but there are things happening in the world, and leadership plays a key role in everything in life.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things we talk about a lot on this show is politics. So, in light of today's world and the political climate out there, what types of things can be learned from the history lesson that you just gave us, Kyle?
Well, before we start, whenever a comparison, we're going to make a comparison to the French army. That's why we've been talking about this.
Mhm.
So, invariably, whenever a comparison is made to something that happens in World War II, somebody has to be Hitler, right?
Mm-hmm.
The old
Hitler
good one.
Hitler was the bad guy. So, there's always a bad guy in any kind of story. So, I want to preface all of this by saying that I'm not calling anyone Hitler when we go through this. No one is, even though comparisons may be made, I'm not saying that they're Hitler. I'm not saying they're Nazis, anything like that. So, just wanted to.
Okay, we have our disclaimer out of the way now. Okay, that's good. Hopefully, we won't be sued. Okay.
So, the whole battle in France wound up only taking 43 days. It was really quick. And the Germans, while they had done their plan, their planning was very good. A lot of it was just having the guts, we'll say, or you could fill that in with another word, to do the stuff that they did. Because a lot of it was just kind of crazy. Like I talked about the two generals that almost got kicked out.
Right.
They just went for it.
Yeah.
It wasn't maybe the smartest strategy at the time. With the information that everybody thought was going to happen, but they had the guts and they had the lack of fear, I guess we could say,
right,
to carry out their plans.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the French and the British kind of on the back foot.
Right.
So if we look at things that are going on now, we talk about it all the time with politics. How I think of one of the previous podcasts we did, we had talked about it more in depth, but basically our premise was whenever Democrats are in power, and I don't want to lump on whenever leftists, I'll say, are in power as far as the government is concerned, the uh, Congress and presidency, they keep marching forward. They have the guts to keep pushing their ideas and their policies forward and forward and forward. We had Obamacare. We have the stuff they're doing now with the third trimester abortions. Give me some other examples.
Well, they're talking about, changing the Constitution in terms of the Electoral College.
Oh, yeah, there you go. There's another one. Well, they haven't done it yet, but
no, they haven't done a lot of it
Green
yet.
New
Deal, right? So they're pushing the envelope, just like we talked about with. Again, I'm not saying they're Hitler, but in the example we gave, there was nobody pushing back on his agenda. Yeah. His agenda was world domination, and he was taking one country after another, and giving these great, so quote unquote, excuses as to why this had to be. And instead of pushing back, the leadership of the other countries was just saying, "Oh, okay, but no more after this. That's it."
Yeah.
And that's what we see too many times with Republicans as well, I think is the point you're making.
Yeah, Republicans, even when they get in power, we don't reverse any of these policies. You're not taking ground back from the Germans. You're just trying to hold what you have right now. We need to hang on, so we remove the mandate for Obamacare. We talk about, we run on, abortion is bad and it's terrible. We should do something about it. And we run on border security and it's bad and we need to do something about it. And but once we get in power, all right, we're just going to hang on. We're just going to link arms and not a step further. There's no counterattack, just like with France.
Well, yeah, just like when they got into Germany, like you said, and then they stopped and they said, "Uh-oh, something is unnatural about this. We have advanced, and we're not used to advancing. We're used to playing defense instead of offense. So let's back up here."
Yeah.
And I think that's too many times that's true with the Republican Party. Yes. So, absolutely. So, again, just to kind of look back at what France did wrong, they were appeasers, or the Republicans tend to be appeasers.
Yeah.
And many times they do. And like you say, they play defense too much, or they try and stick with the status quo rather than trying to actually advance their pro-family, pro-business, pro-God agenda. We just sit there and say, "Look how bad the Democrats are," but we don't really push forward with things.
Yeah, and there was a lot of infighting in the French government and the higher ups in the military, because some people wanted to capitulate, and some people wanted to fight on at any. And I also want to say that while there was a lot of French retreating and running away, the old adage about the French rifle,
Well, that's actually it was the Italian.
The Italians, that's right. Yeah.
But now we get everybody pissed off.
But there was this idea that the French were cowardly and they ran away in World War II, and there was a lot of that had happened. They retreated, but there was still plenty that were trying to fight the good fight and fight on.
The French resistance, the French underground was very instrumental in aiding the outcome of the war, for sure.
That guy that I was talking about earlier, General Hunsinger, the one that didn't pay attention
Right.
to Ted and Jay's warnings. There was another time where he set up a defensive perimeter because they thought that the Nazis were going to come through here, and the Nazis just went around them.
Yep.
And his people under his command were saying, all right, we need to attack them, and he said, no, our job is to defend. This is what we're going to do. We're going to sit here. We're going to defend. So they didn't go after them, and he wound up. Obviously, I'm not a super big fan of him.
Yeah.
But he wound up after France capitulated. The Nazis kind of set up this puppet regime they called Vichy France.
Vichy France, yeah.
And he was one of the higher ups in that.
Wow.
And carried out this plan that they had where they killed off a bunch of the Jewish generals that were in the French army.
Wow.
So you had these people that were kind of betraying.
So kind of French in name only, maybe?
Yeah.
Like a Fino?
Yeah.
Fino.
Kind of betraying the cause. And,
Right. And we certainly see that in the ranks of some of the Republicans, right?
Yeah. And I see a lot of stuff. I have a lot of friends and stuff on Facebook, and they get into discussions
Right.
politically. And this one guy, I don't agree with him on everything, but he was talking about he's kind of middle of the road on a lot of things, but he's I guess more right wing than left, but he's very pro-life.
Mm-hmm.
And he was saying how the Republicans aren't really pro-life. Politicians, not just regular people, whatever.
Right.
He's basically saying that, they say all the stuff that they need to say to get elected, but once the rubber's on the road, it's time to do something about it, they back down and they don't do what they're supposed to do. He was saying they had, Republicans had control of the White House, House of Representatives, and the Senate for 2 years.
Yeah. Right.
And we didn't stop funding to Planned Parenthood. We didn't, put something in, to limit abortions. And then you have the Democrats. We haven't even put anything to limit them, but they're passing policy to ensure that we can't later. They're trying to enshrine the third trimester abortions without it ever being said that they can't do it.
Well, that's a perfect example of what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Offensive and get your agenda passed when you're in power. We just sat back and said, okay, we're going to hold the line right here. And now after the midterms, the Democrats have gained control of the House, and we couldn't do it if we wanted to now. So our opportunity was lost, and here they are, even with one House Congress, and they're attempting to push their agenda on. In some ways, you got to give them credit because they do have the guts and just the blind. I don't know whatever you would call it. Just they just continue to push their agenda and push their agenda and push their agenda.
Mm-hmm. Even if it may seem that they have outrun their supply lines, they still continue to push forward.
Very, very good analogy because really, in some ways, I think they are at this point. They've gone. We're now a lot of the independents, a lot of people who were middle of the road are kind of aghast a little bit at some of the things that the Democrats are pushing forward. So they've maybe gone, a bit too far. Only time will tell if that's the case or not. But you're right. They will keep pushing, as long as we'll leave that door open for them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem. We have, like you said, we have the independents and maybe some of the more conservative Democrats kind of looking at these people, you know, the progressive wing
Right.
of the Democratic Party, and they're like, what, you know, what are these people doing? They're pushing for stuff that's ridiculous, you know, like third trimester abortions,
Yeah.
you know, even talking about infanticide to a certain
Right.
extent,
Right.
you know, with the guy from Virginia.
Yeah.
You know, so they say, okay, well, let's put these let's vote for these Republicans. We'll get them in power. But even if the majority of the country thinks a certain way, the
Right.
people that they elect are the ones that have to implement the policy. You know,
Right.
even if the soldiers in the French army wanted to push forward and to attack and, you know, to take the fight to them, to counterattack, if the generals and the people in command aren't willing to do that,
Yep.
then what, you know, what do you do? What do you,
Yeah.
where you at?
You suffer the consequences.
Yeah. I mean, you know, Trump ran on border security and getting rid of Obamacare. And like I said, the Republicans had all branches of government for 2 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't even, like, these things, I guess Obamacare was, you know, I mean, there was some talk about that recently. You know,
Well, we were close. We were close
Yeah.
to getting Obamacare repealed. There was 1 or 2 votes that held us up. John McCain was one of those, and I don't know if it was Rand Paul or I forget who it was, but anyway, again, people that ran on the you know, the pullback on Obamacare, but then when the time came, we didn't do it.
Yeah.
And we didn't even put up for the vote for the wall. You know, that's
Right.
the
Right.
part that
And that
blew
was a
my
huge
mind.
mistake. That was
Like,
a huge mistake.
why wait until the Democrats take
Yeah.
majority in the House to push this? And, you know,
Yeah.
now we're going to shut down the government and, you know, we're really going to fight for this when we
Yeah.
could have passed it, you know,
Yeah.
a lot easier,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
just a couple of years ago.
Right. That's, you know, and that's the sad thing about it is it's all politics. It's not what's good for the country. It's what's going to get me
Mhm.
elected again.
Yeah. And that's the part that drives me crazy. You know, it's,
Right.
you get elected. I mean, like, especially with the House of Representatives, because, you know, most of them are new and they only have a 4-year term as opposed to the 6 of the senators.
2-year term.
2-year term, sorry, yeah. So probably more than half of their time being in the government is them just running again.
Yeah. Yep.
You know.
And because they can do that, and because they have, you know, franking privileges and things like that, it's very, very difficult to unseat a representative once they're in there.
Yeah.
The power of incumbency in the House is extremely high.
Yeah.
You know, you hear
Well, I
about
mean,
some,
like, even here in where I live, I've lived here for 10 years. So obviously I've done voting for the House of Representatives 5 times. I think there was only one time when our representative didn't run unopposed.
oh yeah, and that one time when he had up, did he win or not?
He won, yeah.
Yeah. So there you go.
But, you know, he's just running unopposed. Like, I mean, I get it. Like, nobody wants to spend money to, you know, and a lot of it comes from the RNC and the DNC where they, you know, where they're going to put their money. They're going to put their money where they think, you know, they have a chance of winning, obviously.
Sure.
You know,
Sure.
you're not going to pump a bunch of money into an area that you know you're going to win or you know you're going to lose. But, you know, nobody even runs here. You know, it's just the one guy. And every year or every couple of years, he gets reelected because nobody even runs against him.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. And so you got the same people up there doing the same things, and there's so much incentive to not rock the boat, to not, you know, quote unquote, drain the swamp like Trump is trying to do. And sadly, you've got people from both parties who want illegal immigration and who want late term abortions and who want things that the Republicans say they're against.
Yeah.
But many of the elected officials, because of lobbyists, because of special interests, because of their own greed and wanting to look a certain way for reelection, they won't vote against these things or for things that need to be voted for.
Mm-hmm.
So there's your fear factor, like we talked about with the French. They're afraid um, to stand up and be counted, to actually go on the offensive and that sort of thing. And then you got crazy Democrats like Ocasio-Cortez,
Yeah,
who
and
should. I mean, you would think any normal person with any self-reflection and humility at all, as many times as it's been pointed out that she's just wrong on her facts
mm-hmm.
and her arguments are ridiculous. She keeps screaming them at the top of her lungs, and she keeps getting. I mean, she was just on the cover of Time magazine, and they dubbed her the Phenom.
Yeah.
You know,
And that's also, there was a lot of talk about when she first got elected, and she had all these ideas, a Green New Deal or whatever she was pushing. Everybody was like, she just got elected, she should sit and let the other people, do it for a while. And that was coming from both sides, Republicans and Democrats.
yeah.
And I was like, obviously I don't endorse her particular brand of what she was trying to do, but
Right.
at least she had the guts to do it. It was a stupid idea, and but she had the guts to do it. She wasn't just sitting there and saying, well, let's let the more senior members decide what to do. Like the two generals who just kind of disobeyed orders and moved right through.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the crazy part is that because of that, she has really taken control of the Democrat Party. Nancy Pelosi has acquiesced to this 29-year-old crazy woman from the Bronx. I don't know how many times.
Yeah.
Because she's she's popular. She's got a lot of people. As stupid as the things are that she says, a lot of people cheering for her, and it scares.
And there was a lot of, the German military. They had the Prussian officers was their thing. Back in the Roman Empire, the German Empire days.
Right.
So they had all these kind of the old guard there too. And I read one guy. He really there was a bunch of different ideas to get rid of Hitler throughout the entire regime. And the first one was when he was pushing at Czechoslovakia, because they were like, we can't go to war. We were not recovered enough to go to war with France and England, and they were going to assassinate him.
Yeah.
And then France and England, kind of capitulated on it and just let him have Czechoslovakia. And so where they had been kind of popular in the German military, like, yeah, we need to do this, they kind of lost face when Hitler was proven right. They didn't have to go to war then. And there was this other general who was like horrified at the thought of invading Belgium again, like invading neutral countries for the second time in 20 years, and he was very against it. But, all of the progressive Nazis, who had all these great ideas or whatever, they kind of, pushed him aside. We need to do this. This is how we need to do it.
Yeah.
Yep. That's right.
Another parallel there, I guess.
Yeah. So there you have it. I mean, we can look back at history. We have the benefit of knowing what the outcome was, and we can kind of look at what went into decisions made and different things, and we can see
and what
the
could have been.
And what could have been. Absolutely right.
Had they pushed forward when they took that land, had they, went ahead and attacked when they had them, on the ropes there, with the supply lines.
Or right in the beginning, when Hitler went into the Rhineland, they could have just said no.
Yeah, they
and
would
that
have backed down.
Who knows, what the difference in history may have been just from that one little action. It's like, when you have a problem that's small and you ignore it, or you appease it in this case, and it grows in boldness and strength and audacity, and then you have a huge problem, and turning the tide is much more difficult, and that's what we're up against in this country right now.
So
Yeah.
we can keep staying on the defensive, or we can.
Well, but here's the thing, Kyle. You got to remember this. I think in many ways, and I'm not saying anybody's perfect. I'm not saying that everything is peachy, but we have a president right now that's more on the offensive than any we've had that I can remember. He's not playing defense. He's actually trying to play some offense. And look what is happening. He's getting pushback from the media, the Democrats, the Republicans, the independents. It's change is not an easy thing for anybody. As Republicans, whether you support Donald Trump or not, we still need to look at the fact that even though you may not like his demeanor and you may not the things he says, we can do it different. Our tactics can be different, but that's what we need to do. Is we need to not just sit back and play defense like we've been for the last 50 or 60 years.
Yeah.
So that's my 2 cents anyway.
So I mean, what's the answer to that? I mean, we could say it till we're blue in the face, but how do we make that a reality?
Well, the part of the problem that you have is you got apathy. There's too much apathy in the country. There's people who have no idea what's going on politically. They have no idea. They get their news in little sound bites on the internet or from whoever, and they really don't know who to believe. They don't know, what the ramifications of some of these things. They don't think these things through. And until people begin to take notice of things, and unfortunately, things seem to have to get really bad before people sit up and take notice. And I don't know how much further things are going to have to go before people are going to sit up and realize.
Yeah, but if things go too far, then is it too late?
Well, it's like, it's like, well, I mean, it's the recent thing here with the Democrats who talk about, like, well, we're going to abolish the Electoral College, and we're going to do this, and it's like you said, like, you have all these politicians wanting to just sit there and like, well, we're not going to let anything go any further. As long as we're in, and we're not going to try to push back on this. We're just going to stop it and then just kind of hold on to what we have.
Right.
And it's going to get to the point where it's just like, well, now we don't have Electoral College anymore, and then now
genie back in the bottle.
Yeah.
Right, exactly right. So you hope it doesn't get that far,
Well,
but
hope in one hand and
in
the other. See which one fills up first.
Well, sure. But what's other than that? There's more information passed in the world today than there has been. Podcasts by the million out there. There's YouTube. There's the internet. There's articles. There's on and on and on. There's information flying around everywhere. But yet, it seems like the more that's out there, the more ignorant people become. And
I think a lot of people just are tired of it.
I think so too.
They like we talked about, they elect these Republicans and then they don't do anything.
Right.
And you're like, well, what's the point?
Yeah.
I mean,
But see, you can't. I get that frustration, but you can't just acquiesce. You can't just say, well, throw your hands up in the air and say, I'm not going to vote anymore, because then, we've had Hillary Clinton in the White House. And who knows who would be in the White House next? Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, God forbid, Elizabeth Warren. So
Cortez.
yeah, as soon as she turns 35, or else maybe they'll just change the rules.
Yeah.
They're already talking about lowering the age to vote.
Yeah, down to 16. Yeah. Have you ever looked on the YouTube and seen some of the stupid videos that young people post of stupid things that they do when they're 15, 16 years old? And
Eating
you're gonna
Tide
trust the direction of our country.
Yeah.
It's unreal. Anyway.
But I think, kind of what needs to happen is, people that actually do care need to run for things, run for office. Like if you have a guy that runs unopposed every single year, every single election,
Right.
run again. I mean, maybe you'll
Yeah,
lose, maybe
yeah.
you won't, but
No, I think
do
the average,
something about it.
absolutely average, folks that just care about their community, care about the country, have some common sense. They absolutely should throw their hat in the ring.
And that's what we decided to do when we decided to do this podcast. I mean, we get together and I mean, we do the same kind of things we do on here, just, talk and complain about Democrats and Republicans.
Sure.
And then we just decided, and I'm not saying we're doing any great service to the, world or anything by doing this.
Right.
But, we're trying to do something. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe it'll work, maybe it won't.
Yeah.
But
Well, that's the thing too. That's the other point of it. And I talk, if you feel strongly about these things, if you have opinion, you should talk to people that you work with. You should talk to people you go to church with, people that you know, your friends, your family. You should make your opinions known, not in a threatening,
yeah, you don't have to be a
tentative
jerk about it or
way,
anything.
but there aren't enough deep, meaningful conversations that happen in the world today. And when we're talking literally, and I don't think I'm overstating this, we're talking literally about the future of our country.
Yeah.
It's extremely important to get the word out and talk to folks, whatever way that would be. So.
Yeah, I agree. And we need to hold these politicians accountable.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah.
So.
Indeed.
Well, I think that was a good, good analogy that you put forth, Kyle, and a good idea to, to kind of bring these two subjects together and look at the similarities and the differences, and kind of helps to crystallize some of the things going on today.
Mm-hmm.
So hats off to you for the idea here.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
You do that.
It's my two favorite things. It's history and politics. So it's
History and politics. I thought I was one of your favorites.
my favorite.
Okay.
My favorite person.
No, don't say that with your wife sitting in. So, all right. Well, that was good. Again, we hope that everybody listening enjoyed it, and we do want to encourage folks to leave comments on the YouTube page there. Get in touch with us, and
yeah, we have an email address. You can send us comments or
what is that?
It's changeyourworldshow@gmail.com.
Awesome. Okay.
All right.
So agree with us, disagree with us. It's either way. That's fine. Let us know what you think. If you got suggestions for future episodes, that would be great. Or if you just, if anything we've said struck a chord with you in one way or another, we'd love to hear that as well. Let us know that you're out there and listening. We appreciate that. So, anything else we want to add before we wrap?
Not really. Just think about, like we said, think about the past and how we don't want history to repeat itself.
Amen.
Yeah.
And even you Democrats, the Nazis did turn around and attack the communists. So
Yeah.
so watch out.
That's right. How about you, Case?
No, I'm pretty good.
Okay.
A lot of good discussion here.
Yeah, I think so. All right. Well, we do appreciate everybody tuning in, and hope you continue to do that. And we invite you to go out there. Of course, every time that we speak to you, we invite you to go out there and do something to change your world. And we would hope that you would take that seriously, because you certainly can do that in your sphere of influence. So we would encourage you to do that.
That's right.
And I guess for our whole clan, we're going to sign off, and we appreciate you all tuning in. Thank you very much.